It was an ordinary evening, just like any other, the kind where the air feels calm, almost lulling you into a false sense of security. But in hindsight, that night was anything but ordinary. It was the beginning of something that would unravel everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and loyalty. Ryan, my nephew, was pacing the living room. His phone was practically glued to his hand, and there was this faint smirk on his lips. It wasn't unusual for him to stay over on weekends. He had been spending more time with us since his dad, my brother, had passed away. I had taken on the role of his father figure, and in many ways, I saw him as another son. "Uncle, can I borrow the car tonight?" he asked, his tone casual, almost too casual, as he flipped the question out like it was nothing. I looked up from the book I was reading. "Where to?" "Just meeting a friend. Won't be long," he replied, not meeting my eyes. It was subtle, but I noticed it. The slight hesitation, the way his gaze flickered away. Something felt off. But I pushed the thought aside. Why wouldn't I trust him? He was family, after all. I tossed him the keys. "Drive safe, Ryan," I said. He nodded and left, but as he stepped out the door, a cold gust of air swept in. It wasn't just the chill that made me uneasy. It was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The hours dragged on. I tried to focus on the TV, but my thoughts kept drifting. Lisa, my wife, sat beside me, flipping through channels, but even she noticed my restlessness. "Is something bothering you?" she asked, her voice soft yet curious. "Ryan took the car," I replied. "He said he's meeting a friend." Lisa frowned slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "Did he say who?" "No," I said with a shrug. "Just a friend." We both fell silent, but the unease in the room was thick. As the night wore on and Ryan still hadn't returned, Lisa suddenly spoke again. Her tone was low, but there was something sharp in it. "I saw him earlier today," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Where?" I asked, my heart rate quickening. "Near the old oak tree," she replied. "But he wasn't alone." Her words hit me like a freight train. "Who was with him?" "I couldn't see clearly," she admitted, "but they looked close. Too close." A knot tightened in my stomach. Ryan was young, 22 years old. He was carefree, sometimes reckless, but reckless with emotions, with people's trust. The thought nagged at me, growing louder and louder in my mind. The next morning I decided to confront him. Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. "So," I began, keeping my tone casual, "how was your night?" "Good," he said without looking up. "Who'd you meet?" "Emma," he replied. "You know her, my friend from high school." I froze for a moment. Emma. Of course I knew her. She had practically grown up in our house, always hanging around Ryan. She was like family. "Just catching up?" I asked, pressing just a little. "Yeah," he said quickly, almost too quickly. As he spoke, my eyes fell on something on the kitchen counter. It was small, delicate, and shiny. A single earring. But it wasn't Lisa's. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. "Ryan," I said, holding it up. "This yours?" He froze. It was subtle, but I caught it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. "Emma must have dropped it," he said, his voice strained. "No big deal." But it was a big deal. Why had Lisa seen them parked late at night? Why was Emma leaving behind jewelry in my car? My mind raced with questions, none of which had good answers. That evening, I couldn't let it go. When Ryan left the house again, I made a decision. I was going to follow him. I told myself it wasn't spying. It was protection. Protection for him, for our family. He drove to a gas station where Emma got into the car. I recognized her immediately. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves, and her smile lit up her face. But it wasn't her presence that unnerved me. It was the way she looked at Ryan. They weren't just friends. This wasn't innocent. They drove to a secluded spot, a quiet lookout point on the edge of town. I parked at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched from the shadows. Inside the car, they were laughing, talking, and then Emma reached out. Her hand lingered on Ryan's arm and my stomach turned. I felt the air leave my lungs as Ryan leaned closer. Their faces were inches apart. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was betrayal unfolding right before my eyes. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture, my hands shaking. I didn't take it for proof. I took it because I needed to see it, to believe it was real. The next morning I waited for Ryan at the breakfast table. The air was heavy with tension. "Where were you last night?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Out with Emma," he replied casually. "Just Emma?" He nodded, but the guilt was written all over his face. I slid my phone across the table, the picture staring back at him. "Explain this," I said. Ryan went pale. He stammered, searching for an excuse, but there was nothing he could say to undo what had been done. Lisa walked in, her face a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Ryan, how could you? Emma has a boyfriend. Do you even realize what you've done?" Ryan tried to apologize, but it was too late. The damage was done. Word got out. Emma's boyfriend found out, and there was a confrontation, a public scene that left no room for doubt. Tempers flared, accusations flew, and everything fell apart. Ryan moved out not long after. He couldn't face the shame, the disappointment. As for Emma, she disappeared, leaving behind a trail of broken trust. Months later, the wounds still haven't healed. Ryan and I talk occasionally, but it's not the same. The bond we once had feels shattered, replaced by a lingering bitterness. I raised him to value honesty, loyalty, and trust. But in the end, he chose a path that led to betrayal. Betrayal doesn't just break hearts. It leaves scars that never truly fade.